Ancient Egypt, a place of mighty pyramids, bustling cities, and a powerful pharaoh. The people depended on the Nile River for water, food, and trade. But something was about to change, something that would shake Egypt to its core. You see, Pharaoh had enslaved the Hebrew people, forcing them into harsh labor and refusing to let them go despite their cries for freedom. Moses stands in front of Pharaoh's throne, looking determined yet calm. Pharaoh watches with a cold expression, surrounded by advisors. Enter Moses, a man chosen by God to lead the Hebrews to freedom. With his brother Aaron, Moses repeatedly approached Pharaoh with a simple message from God: "Let my people go." But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he refused. So God warned that a series of plagues would come upon Egypt until Pharaoh relented. The first plague, the Nile turns to blood. The Nile, once clear, now running red with blood. Fish float lifelessly, and people look on in horror. The first plague struck the very lifeblood of Egypt, the Nile. Moses raised his staff, and the river turned to blood. Fish died, the water stank, and no one could drink it. But Pharaoh's heart remained stubborn. He dismissed Moses, ignoring the warning. The second plague, frogs. Frogs leap out of the river, covering the land, entering homes, filling Pharaoh's palace. People swat at frogs in frustration. Next came frogs. Frogs everywhere, covering the land, invading homes, and even the palace. Egypt was overwhelmed, and Pharaoh finally pleaded with Moses to pray to God to remove them. But once the frogs were gone, Pharaoh changed his mind and refused again. The third plague, gnats. A cloud of gnats fills the air, irritating people and animals alike. Then came gnats, tiny but relentless. Dust from the ground turned into swarms, biting both people and animals. This time, Pharaoh's magicians couldn't replicate the plague. They told Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But still, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. The fourth plague, flies. Flies swarm everywhere, buzzing loudly, covering food, landing on people, disrupting daily life. Next, a wave of flies descended upon Egypt's swarming homes, food, and Pharaoh's palace itself. Yet, miraculously, the land of Goshen, where the Hebrews lived, remained untouched. God was showing that he was in control, but Pharaoh wouldn't listen. The fifth plague, death of livestock. Seen, Egyptians discovering their livestock, cows, sheep, horses, lying lifeless in the fields. Then, a deadly plague struck Egypt's animals, horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, sheep. Egypt's wealth and livelihood depended on these animals, and seeing them die was devastating. Yet, Pharaoh's heart was still unyielding. He was unwilling to surrender control. The sixth plague, boils. Egyptians, including Pharaoh's advisors, suffering from painful boils on their skin, painful sores covering people and animals alike. Even Pharaoh's magicians were stricken and couldn't stand before Moses. But Pharaoh's stubbornness persisted. His pride was blinding him to the suffering of his people. The seventh plague, hail. A violent storm, with hail and lightning striking down, destroying crops, trees, and buildings. The seventh plague brought the most devastating hailstorm Egypt had ever seen. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, and hailstones pummeled the land, shattering trees, crushing crops, and leaving destruction in their wake. Only the Hebrews in Goshen were safe. Pharaoh was shaken. He admitted, "I have sinned this time. The Lord is righteous, and I and my people are wicked." But even after Moses prayed and the storm ceased, Pharaoh's heart hardened once more, and he refused to let the Hebrews go. These 7 plagues served as signs, warnings, and demonstrations of God's power. Each plague struck at the heart of Egyptian life and economy, revealing the futility of Egypt's gods and Pharaoh's resistance. God's intention wasn't just to punish, but to show that true freedom, true power, and true life come from him alone. Through all of this, the Hebrews were safe. Their homes were spared, their animals unharmed. This was God's protection, a promise that even in the darkest times, his people would not be abandoned. The story of the plagues is one of warning and of hope. It reminds us of the dangers of pride and stubbornness, of what happens when power blinds us to compassion. But it also speaks of God's power to protect, to free, and to guide. Pharaoh's resistance led to suffering, but the Hebrews' faith would lead them to freedom. In the end, the lesson is clear. True strength lies not in holding on to control, but in surrendering to the guidance of something greater than ourselves. After these 7 plagues, more would come until Pharaoh finally let God's people go. This story reminds us that sometimes it's in letting go that we find the path to freedom and peace.